things that's common to all photographers, regardless of their genre or whether or not they're an amateur or professional, is that desire to improve. And so today I want to talk about things that I've done or am doing to help me be a better photographer. This is one of my favourite scenes in the whole of the Lake District, and fortunately it's very, very close to where I live. This is Haweswater, and we've got the rig here and Rough Crag that runs all the way up to High Street, which is the highest mountain in the far eastern fells. So the first thing I want to talk about is planning. Now I know it's boring, but we landscape photographers live and die by our preparation. And once you've got past the technical aspects of f11 ISO 100, then landscape photography is really all about being in the right place at the right time. As far as I'm concerned, planning is all about our ability to pre-visualize a shot. So that's knowing what composition we're after and what lighting conditions we need before we come out to shoot. When it comes to planning, I don't think there can be any substitute to coming to a location beforehand. Now, I've been to this area many times before, so I know exactly the composition I want to shoot and exactly the lighting conditions that I want. Unfortunately, the conditions aren't perfect for me today. I would like a bit more of an even covering of cloud, and weirdly I'd also like a bit more wind about to break the surface of the lake and to remove those reflections. The second thing that I've done to improve my photography is to move to full manual mode. Now, modern cameras these days have fantastic autofocus systems and fantastic metering systems, but they can still be fooled. So if I left autofocus switched on and set this camera to program mode, that would allow the camera to decide where to focus, what aperture to use, and what ISO and shutter speed settings to use. And that gives the camera far too much control. So what I like to do is to switch off the autofocus and to move to manual mode. I can then choose exactly where I want to focus and what aperture to use in order to keep everything sharp from front to back. I can then use the right shutter speed to make sure that everything is correctly exposed. The third thing that I've done to improve my photography is to invest in filters. I use three different types of filter. The first is a circular polarizer, which I use to remove glare off wet rocks and damp foliage and grass. The second is an ND graduated filter, which I use to balance the exposure between the sky and the foreground. And the third is ND filters, which I use to increase my shutter speed so that I can blur movement in water and things like that. Now, I use filters predominantly for one reason, and that's to allow me to be much more creative. But it also means that if I can get more right in camera, I can spend more time in the outdoors and less time sat at my computer manipulating my images in Lightroom. Now, I use Lee filters, and they're okay. The grads are absolutely fine, but I don't like my circular polarizer. I find it's very stiff and difficult to adjust. And I use two types of ND filter. I have a big and little stopper, a 10 stop and a 6 stop. And both of them have a blue color cast, which is really bad if you're shooting in bright conditions. So while I've been talking to you, all of that cloud is now lifted and I'm left with blue skies. And although it's not the conditions I was after, I do still quite like the scene as it is. So I'm going to go ahead and take the shot. I have got the circular polarizer on and a 3-stop soft edge grad. I'm not using any ND filters. So 2-second timer, here we go. Nice. The fourth thing that I'm trying to do to improve my photography is to develop my personal style. Now, as you may know, I've been working on simplifying my compositions and going for a much more minimalistic approach. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move my camera to remove as much of this foreground as I possibly can and eliminate the distractions there and go for a much simpler composition. Now that I've moved forward a bit, what I've been able to do is to frame up the shot so it eliminates as much of the distracting foreground as possible. So now I've got a composition focusing on the rig and on Rough Crag as it leads up towards High Street. And that's a much simpler composition, much more in my own personal style, or at least the style that I'm trying to develop. Now unfortunately conditions aren't perfect now. It's far too bright for me and I've got blue skies behind the mountains. But I'm going to take the shot anyway so you can see what I mean. The fifth and final thing that I'm trying to do in order to improve my photography is to tell stories with my photos. And so I've been stood here for a little while looking around trying to think, what story do I want to tell about this particular location? And I'll be honest, it didn't come to me immediately. I had to have a little look around and I had to think quite carefully. But I think I've come up with an idea. And in order to take that shot, I'm going to need to move my camera again. Of course, Haweswater isn't a natural feature. It's actually a reservoir that was built by damming the far end of the valley. And so what I want to do is I want to include this concrete area here that's been left over as part of the construction of the reservoir as a visual clue to the viewer that this isn't a natural feature. So I now need to find a composition that makes best use of that. I've set the tripod up nice and low, trying to make as much of this concrete as I possibly can. I actually quite like this composition. So let me know what you think of this final shot and the story that it tells. I have been trying to cut back on the selfies recently, but as this is such a lovely scene, I think on this occasion I might just allow myself a quick one. So that's the 5 things that I'm trying to do to improve my photography. But what about you? What have you done that's had a drastic impact on the quality of your photographs? Let me know by leaving a comment below. That's just about it for me for this week. Thanks ever so much for watching. Take care of yourselves and hopefully I'll see you next week.